Welcome to today's webinar entitled The Last Commons. We'll be reviewing chapter 2 of the book entitled A Globe Under Siege. It's also the topic of this week's newsletter. But before I begin and introduce the panel and the discussion, I'm introducing ARCOS, our AI agent. And ARCOS, I'm asking you if you'll review the chapter and the associated newsletter for our audience, just to give them an update and an overview of what the two are about. So over to you, ARCOS.
Thanks. Let's dive into Chapter 2 of The Last Commons and the corresponding newsletter. Chapter 2, titled A Globe Under Siege, explores how global challenges are converging to threaten personal and collective sovereignty. It highlights the pressures from technological advancements, geopolitical tensions, and environmental crises, all of which are reshaping how individuals and societies navigate autonomy. The newsletter delves deeper into these themes, providing current examples and reflections on how these global pressures influence our daily lives. Together, they set the stage for today's discussion on reclaiming sovereignty in a world that often feels out of our control. Stay tuned as we unpack these concepts and explore how we can navigate this complex landscape together.
Okay. Thank you, Arcos. And now to initiate the webinar itself, I'm going to introduce the panel. Dawn Ringrose is with us. Thank you, by the way, Randall, for administering the webinar. Dawn's with us. Dawn's background, of course, for those who don't know, Dawn is primarily interested in organizational excellence as achieved through management. Jeff Uhlich has been with us for some time now through the KEI network and is helping me with the book. Background in human resources, been out in the world at large, spent time in Dubai. That's a topic in itself, and has strong interest in small business and the relevance of AI. Haley, who I've known now for more years than I think either one of us want to remember, but Haley's interests are diverse from the world of law to arts and creativity. And Peter MacKinnon, who's our guest today, our fourth panelist, his interests are wide-ranging. He's located in Ottawa, and naturally his interests are in regulations, governance, AI, and is an advisor to governments really throughout North America. So, panel, welcome. I'm going to be posing a few questions just to initiate and get the discussion going. And I'm going to start out with you, Dawn, with the topic today being the globe under siege, which is certainly apropos for this moment, this week. It seems to be forever now. I'm going to talk about converging pressures on modern institutions. The chapter argued that societies are facing multiple stresses simultaneously: economic instability, regulatory strains, technological acceleration, and demographic shifts. Together, these forces create systemic pressure that existing institutions were not designed to manage. Are today's institutions built for the pace of change we now face? Dawn, what are your views?
I think that institutions that are using a good management system like an excellence model would be well equipped to manage change, because within that model are practices like strategic planning and business planning that allow you to take into consideration all of these factors that influence an organization positively or negatively. And using like pestle analysis or SWOT analysis, you take a look at these variables and you anticipate certain things happening, or you plan for other things happening, and you make sure that you've got an ability to respond to change through contingency planning and so forth. So if you've got a good management system like that, you're probably in pretty good shape. But I took this opportunity this week to take a look at some numbers for Canada, and on this global index, which has captured the current state of organizational excellence. And when I looked at Canada on the practices that are important to considering all of these forces of change, and how are we doing in comparison to our other national counterparts, and I'm afraid it's not very good news. We're behind, and so that puts us in a place. And we've had good responses from government, business, and nonprofits. So it's nice balanced number of a good cross section of the population. But we're in a place where we're reactive. We haven't been planful. We're reactive and fragmented, and we're not anticipating it or planning for it, measuring it, or continuously improving. So
Okay.
there's a room to pull up our socks.
Well, there's a tone of optimism there that if organizations were to adopt principles of good management, they may well be able to handle the pace of change. I know there's skeptics that management governance, the systems that we've lived with and heralded for so long are finding this pace of change and the simultaneously stresses more than they can handle. But I'm going to move on now to Haley and talk about the knowledge economy that we've been living through for the last 500 years that some are claiming is what's really under strain given the technological shifts and the rapid rate of change. So the promise that education and knowledge work would ensure stable prosperity is weakening. Productivity rises while wages stagnate, careers fragmenting, and economic insecurity growing. Haley, has the knowledge economy failed its original purpose of sustained prosperity if you only know?
Thank you for giving me this question, Perry. I'm chomping at the bit here to weigh in. Please indulge my my provocative, not contentious response. I think the knowledge economy has not failed just economically. I think it's revealed a deeper failure in what we actually thought education and knowledge were for. Didn't simply overpromise prosperity. It reduced human formation, entire formation of the human being, to economic utility. It sits unwell with me. I hope it sits equally unwell with everyone else. We have treated knowledge as an economic input. We've treated credentials as proxy for value. We've treated productivity as a measurement of life, of the value of our life. So it's not just that the promise is broken. The promise was small. And if there was ever a question to make us wonder why are we here? Are we here to become efficient knowledge workers? And I hope I'm preaching to the choir here. We're meaning makers. We're pattern recognizers. We're moral agents, and above all, we are creators. If these capacities are weakened or outsourced or systematically underdeveloped, then we're not going to have just a labor market disruption. It's the diminishment of the human being. It feels like witnessing a broad mass surgical lobotomy of society. That's where I feel the failure is right now. It's when we talked about this, Perry, and you were talking earlier. I missed that part of the conversation, but last webinar we were talking about putting labels on the age of this, or the age of Aquarius. We can all sing that one. I think we're all old enough to sing that one. And last week I floated the idea that maybe we're entering an age of systems. I'm actually not happy with that response. I truly believe that we are going to look back on this as an age of transhumanism. And the conversation so far, and correct me if I'm wrong, Perry, but I think this is the thesis of your entire book. The focus so far is how AI is going to be overwhelming and taking over us. It can't, but maybe a more alarming happenstance is that it is training us to be like it. It is setting the script. It is setting the parameters for how we are learning, what we are learning. It's writing our script. until we learn the metacognition skills necessary. That's what education is for. Until we learn that, there is no sovereignty. And I think that's the premise of the whole book. That's my rant. Thank you for.
Well, I don't consider it a rant. It may be provocative because of those that have heralded the knowledge economy as the be all and the end all, and suddenly finding that all of a sudden we're being challenged of whether human beings are more than simply agents of productivity. Some say the educational system we live with today was designed in Germany in order that the citizenry could become productive agents in their economy. And we may now be finding that that whole perspective is being challenged as something like AI has come along and said it can displace us as productive agents. Anyway, I'm going to move on to Jeff. Thank you, Haley and Dawn. So far, this is getting richer as we go. Let's see if you can beat any of those. Peter, your turn. My question to you, Peter, is around governance falling behind. Democratic governance relies on deliberation and policy cycles that assume a slower rate of change. And in today's environment of constant crisis and rapid innovation, policy and regulation increasingly lag behind. Can democratic governance keep pace with the technological changes that we're facing today? That's my question of you.
Well, that's an excellent question, and my answer is very simple. They're not able to keep pace at this stage. So this requires a new way of thinking about policy. And I would argue that when you're dealing with something as potentially disruptive as artificial intelligence in regard to its role in society and how it could be used in both good and bad ways, we end up with, I think, a bifurcation in mindset. It's in the sort of the let's call it democracy in general among those countries that practice it with, or try to practice it. And we are seeing a fragmentation that I think is being driven by influencers and ideology that creates basically, silos, which we often refer to as social media kinds of silos. And we end up in echo chambers of reinforcing each other in their beliefs that are actually off the mark with respect to what real reality is. So I think we're duping ourselves, and it's not the AI. AI is a tool that can be used to help do that duping. Deep fakes look so real, but the point is, it's humans that are causing the problems, and they're using a tool called AI to promote their personal bias or ideology or their cause, and we're segmenting ourselves into little fragmented groups. I think that democracy is much more under threat than an autocracy is when it comes to this scale of what AI can do to a society.
So our institutions that we've relied on to be our sources of safety and support in the knowledge economy are not keeping up and may in fact be under significant stress, not just because of the rate of change, but because the whole economy, as Haley has pointed out, has been a culture that has valued human beings as productive agents, and all of a sudden that's being challenged from the personal level right to the institutional level. All right, Jeff, let's see if we can find any hope in this story. Technology without understanding. Advanced digital and AI systems increasingly shape decisions across society and at the personal level too. Yet their operations are often opaque. Capability now outpaces public comprehension and oversight, and personal as well, as we're all facing here. What happens when systems outperform human understanding?
Well, I think what a number of the other panelists have already referred to is a reflection of what's happening in those circumstances, as that those systems are outperforming human understanding. And your question talked about the capability now outpaces public comprehension and oversight. I think it's actually deeper than that. I think the capabilities are outpacing even the ability of the companies that are producing these models. They don't understand, in all cases, how it's doing what it's doing. I saw an interview with a Google DeepMind or Google engineer, senior leader, and he was talking about how in one of their training runs that the model had begun to, I think it was Bangladeshi. It had started to speak and translate Bangladeshi and had never been trained to do so. And they were surprised, and they didn't understand how it had generalized and made that leap without their specific direction. So if the people building and launching these systems don't themselves have have a full understanding of how they operate, then how can we expect a government or an institution or an organization scrambling just to stay ahead? And it's impossible, by the way, to stay ahead because there's news every week that changes everything, it seems. And I think it just outpaces all of our capacity to understand and to deal with. And I really applaud what Haley was saying, because it's kind of you're saying something out loud about a knowledge economy and about a capitalist system that really needs to be said. And this bifurcation that Peter mentioned, we talk about it now in terms of wealth inequality and the K-shaped economy, and that those that are using these tools and those that have wealth are getting wealthier, and those that don't have these tools and don't have assets and resources are getting poorer. And that process, I think, is going to continue until there is some more fundamental question asked about how all of this works. And I agree with Peter. I think our capability to govern these systems is being seriously challenged. I don't think our political systems are up to the task. I think you talked often about surveillance capitalism, Perry. I mentioned this in a presentation I did this morning. When I asked the question of the audience, what is the gross domestic product of Canada? It's $2.28 trillion last year. And then I asked, what's the market cap of NVIDIA? And it's over $4 trillion. And I said, now what's the market cap of Apple? Over $3 trillion. And what's the market cap of Alphabet? It's over $3 trillion. I said, three companies have more market cap than the combined GDP of Germany, Italy, and Canada. And I then mentioned in the States, with Citizens United, what you have is a situation where Amazon has 1,000 lobbyists working in DC. Facebook, or Meta, has a similarly large number. Chuck Schumer's daughter works for Meta, right? So regulatory capture is what has taken place. This is why there's no adequate regulation of AI, and nor was there any adequate regulation of social media in the prior years. This is a systematic or a systemic problem, and we have to focus on the U.S. because that's where Silicon Valley is. That's where these entities are born, and that's where the capital market is that supports them, and that's where they are being sustained. And the people that need to be doing the regulation to address all these things we've been talking about, they are captured by those commercial interests. And that is something Perry and I have chatted about before too. He talks about the clash between public and private. And I always want to add the third leg of that stool, and that's corporate. And I think that's an important piece that is driving that bus. And to Haley's point, maybe driving that bus with all of us on it right over a cliff, because it's not healthy for us as human beings. And that's my rant.
At one time, this discussion might have been considered philosophy 403, but we're dealing with it now because it's real. Purpose. What is the future of mankind when we are just guinea pigs of a technology that is out of control? As you point out, Jeff, the corporations themselves, the government's capability of regulating, the personal sovereignty being at risk because, as we've seen with social media, where can we place our confidence? We have no choice. It has to be placed at the personal level. If mankind is really the collection of individuals, and we don't have the capability, or we can't learn or adapt. We're just guinea pigs of the future. And we are riding a wave that we are witnesses to without having the capacity to control. I tend to, after having taken my 3-day break in Salt Spring Island, feel a little bit more optimistic when I see moss on trees and smell the salt air, that there is a future. But the future is not what we have known it in the past. And there may be an awful lot to be said about finding purpose by finding oneself, by spending time with oneself, by getting to know oneself better in an environment where there is so much significant change. So I have one last question for all of you, and then we're going to open up for the audience as a whole. And by the way, the numbers today are superb, so I'm delighted to see the number of faces that we've got today. So my question of you, panel, and then I'll extend it to the audience as a whole, is AI as an integrating force. I'm going to try and switch this into a positive, that artificial intelligence is bringing all these pressures together: economics, socio-demographic, technological, regulatory, accelerating economic change, challenging governance, questioning the central role of human knowledge in the economy, and saying maybe we will be better as a byproduct of all these stresses and find another age where the purpose goes beyond faith, beyond knowledge, to whether it be creativity or whatever that next wave or age may well be. So is there grounds to find a silver lining in the stresses that we're going through? I usually look for a nodding head here, hoping it isn't sleeping. But does anyone on the panel want to jump into finding a silver lining in this? Don't be depressive. Take your meds. Who's taking meds? Go ahead, Dawn. You go first. Then I'll call on Peter.
Okay, I would say that, if we were wise, we could use AI as a strategic resource to kind of augment our capability, and if we harness it well, we can be more productive, and we might even have some time left over for higher order thinking, and being creative and innovative. But on the flip side, I'm also concerned that if we don't use it wisely, then we can probably wade into doing things that aren't appropriate and aren't adding value to the human condition. It's like I was been paying attention to the tourism industry, and as an example of looking at airlines to take a trip, and how the system is trying to find the highest price that they can sell you that flight for, rather than helping you to find a flight and purchase from them versus a competitor.
Well, I mean, doing the wise thing still poses the question, what is the wise thing? Is it increasing productivity in a world of abundance? Is it doing something very different than simply chasing I know and maybe being more creative? Peter, you had something to add here.
Well, I was going to suggest that part of the issue, and so you said we're looking for a silver lining, but this is probably part of the problem. So we need to resolve this item that I'm going to focus on. I think that the public has been misled, primarily by the United States and partly at the hands of the lobbyists that we just spoke about in terms of the corporate backers, in trying to make it such that there's no rules for AI in terms of oversight, because they are arguing it will hinder innovation. And at the same time, they say that we're in a race with China, and basically it's an existential race. I think this is false. I think the Americans are just basically saying China's the boogeyman and we got to do something about it. China does not at all project itself in any way the way the U.S. is projecting itself with respect to policy, with respect to role of industry in the equation, with respect to this new kind of technology. China, in fact, was issuing issuing requests to the world 2 and 3 years ago on advice that they should be passed on things like how to regulate large language models. I'd never seen this before. I've been an observer of Chinese science and technology and innovation for decades. I've never seen where the Chinese government turns to the population, asks for advice before making the rules. They've done this a number of times with AI, and they're now they do approve the release of these products to a high degree of testing. Naturally, there's another over dimension. You can't say bad things about the party. So I mean, there's that side of it, but I mean, our neighbors to the south have their biases too. So we can't we have to be open about how this is progressing. Uh, we absolutely, in my view, have to have collaboration under some normal set of rules that have to be developed because they're not there yet. Only between nation rules that we actually have is the European AI Act, which doesn't formally go fully into effect until this August. And some parts of it have gone into effect, and the parts that haven't gone into effect was a challenge by several members of the EU at the last minute that the rules that they were making were probably too strict on the limitation of innovation. So they were starting to figure the same arguments that the US was using. Don't have rules because it will impact innovation. There's no reason to race, in my view. We're dealing with such an incredibly powerful technology that can go very much awry, even as it is today, in the hands of the nefarious actor, and who has access to channels of disruption through the internet. And I think that there's a false argument that's being put up about this race, if you like, between China and America, and that it's the Americans who started it.
Well, regardless of who started it, something is underway, and whether it's a race or not, it's a race to the bottom, or a race to the top, or a race to nowhere. I'm not quite sure what the race, what the end point of this race is, and I'm also not sure who I trust to be the body that initiates collaboration,
Yes.
because the sources of power in the economy that we have lived with are those that are most productive, that have the GDP, and those are the corporations. The corporations today, if you measure GDP, are the ones in control, not the nations themselves. So who do you turn to? Who do we turn to? Because the institutions we don't trust, the governments are overwhelmed, or they're so heavily politicized that the challenge is, in the state that we're in right now, where is the future to be found? Bill, you've got your hand up. Maybe you got an answer.
No, just a response to what Peter said. In history, it's always seizing the high ground. When we were land-based, it was to seize the hills and the mountains. You dominated the plateaus. When we became naval power, that extended the high ground to control of the seas. When we entered the space race, it was control even higher. Start with aviation, control of the skies, and then the space race, control of space. We've got a new high ground, and that's control of this technology called AI. So I counter Peter. It is a race, it is a war, and it is he who controls the infrastructure, power, and the facility that this new technology is provided that is seizing the high ground. And that is why the US seized the challenge from China. China wants to seize the high ground, as does the US and its allies. So I think it is a mistake not to see it as it is, in my opinion, adversarial. Who controls this technology will dominate the world. And this is what the race is about. So
Okay,
I don't see it as a buddy-buddy system here.
Control the technology toward what end? The chat on the sideline and embedded into almost all of the comments, we keep on throwing GDP out as if that's the ultimate measure of value. That's the knowledge and the economy of production. If that is false, what is the measure of the future? But maybe the nation that is the strongest nation of all is not a nation of high GDP, but is a nation of human morality. And I really don't want to get into the Trudeau era, but it's conceivable that we are measuring the wrong thing in the new economy. Go ahead, Peter.
I agree with that, Perry. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Okay.
What AI is doing is it's removing the drudgery of human labor. We're
Right.
no longer turners of bolts and and placing, painting things and like cars and things like that. The Industrial Revolution will be dehumanized, and machines and AI will take it over. And I would say what that will do is it will increase and allow people, instead of being machines themselves in a cog, to move to a higher level of, as you point out, creativity, wisdom, introspection. The question of why are we here becomes more predominant, more philosophical, instead of having to do the drudgery work of filling in spreadsheets to earn our income. So I'm no predictor of the future, but that's kind of technology always pushes up to high order thinking. 25 years ago, we didn't have systems engineers, programmers, or corporate designers as we have today. The new industry and new services get created once we remove the base work of growing food, for example. So I'm far more positive than I think the panel portrays here in their dialogue.
Well, being positive and getting some sense of where we are headed, I try to think of a metaphor, and the metaphor I'm going to tiptoe gently or carefully through this is the role of women and the culture of the relevance of women in our society, given the technologies of the last 2 centuries, including the pill, have transformed women from simply being producers of babies and administrators of families into wanting to become productive members of society and to join the male workforce as producers. Maybe they got it wrong. Maybe that's really not what we needed. What we need is that feminine relevance, that contribution that women make to a society as something other than simply male producers. Okay, go ahead, Peter.
Well, I'm going to say one of the problems, and I think this is a serious problem. I was a part of a team that was put together by the OECD back in the late 90s in regard to what do we measure with the coming digital economy.
Right,
Well, here we are 25 years plus later, and we still don't measure it.
right.
So there's no national account that takes into measure our digital economy. So I mean, we're dealing with waving hands in effect because there isn't the real data that we need to look at fundamentally developing policy that relates. That's tied to data. We can develop policy that's tied to our perceptions and waving our arms, but we're
Okay,
not measuring it.
but Peter, to shape policy is to have some sense of what your objective is. In a world where AI is all-knowing and potentially all-producing, what is the policy we're looking for in the future other than safety so that it doesn't do bad things to us? What is the policy that you're seeking?
We're talking about good governance. We're talking about democracy. So I would suggest the policy we're discussing as a broader framework here is, the survival of democracy and how can this technology play a role in sustaining democracy and not allowing it to come down.
Okay,
I
so
mean, as I think a number of us have agreed that we see democracies could be more under threat by misuse of this technology than an autocracy. And I see the world is dividing itself into zones zones of influence as opposed to alliances among nations.
Yeah.
The Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, which we reflect on in the US, we don't have quite the counterpart, but it talks about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's focused on the individual. It says democracy exists for you. That's not the system we have today. You're asked to what can you do for government, not what can government do for you. And yet we live today under this umbrella that somehow we exist for government, whether it be taxation, political correctness, becoming productive agents of a GDP because we're in a race to be bigger than others. And my GDP is bigger than yours, therefore I have more value. This is all being thrown out the window. And maybe we need to come back to the basics of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that's the way the system should be flipped again and recognize why it was put together in the first place, which was for us as individuals to pursue our potential. Ain't that a revolution?
Well, I think the key thing we as society and our leaders in particular need to recognize is this isn't normal times. I think this is one of the most unique events in human history.
Yeah.
We have a polycrisis of the governance. We have a polycrisis of our environment. We're not going to be able to solve the polycrisis of the environment without solving at least elements of the polycrisis of governance. And if we don't solve either of these, it looks like we're going to be in uh, a spiral downward as opposed to anything that's going to lead us out of the mess we're in. Now, I'm
And
sure we can be led out of this mess, but where's the heart and soul to do it?
Well, where's the leadership? I mean,
That's it.
I had to pose something as simple as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to say, if you formulate policy that is focused on the relevance of the individual in society, not as a productive agent, but as a person who can pursue what their purpose is. We've all fallen into this culture where to know is our purpose. And
well, I was going
if AI knows better than we do, what is our purpose? We're in competition with AI and we're not going to win. Go ahead,
Well,
Bill.
we're probably more in competition with our digital twin than we would be with AI per
Well,
se. But I
okay.
think we're all going to start having digital twins one of these
Yeah.
days.
Well, I got ARCOS that I've been wrestling with, but I can still I can shut it off. Jeff, you're smiling. Dawn, you're smiling. Haley, you're nodding. I'm looking for other hands. Anybody can jump in here
I
that
just,
wishes to do so. Go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to say I actually agree with Bill that it is a war. It is being managed as a war, as an arms race between nations. But I think Bill said something that I also thought interesting in contrast to what Haley and Don said. Bill said, "He who controls the technology controls the world." And the emphasis I'm putting on that statement is the he part, because what Don and Haley were advocating for was the collaboration. And Perry, you referred to it, that the feminine side of this and that deeper appreciation of what is actually valuable in human
Yeah,
existence
yeah,
that isn't adequately represented. We
yeah,
still are. Look at all of the CEOs of these tech companies.
yeah,
Name a woman in that group.
yeah. Yeah,
You know,
but let's not get gender. Let's talk about what it is that we were talking about here. We're talking about an emotionality. We're talking about a sensitivity to one another. We're talking not just about production. We're talking about the environment which we wish to live in that is respectful of one another and our individual potentials. That's not something that is classically male, that survival of the fittest and production and winning. There is an element that maybe AI, if we can only recognize that right now it's singular. It's all about production because it's feeding us as we have always been fed to increase our productivity. If women were in charge, would they be building AI to be doing something other than simply increasing productivity and wanting to know as opposed to wanting to care?
I think it's a reflection of that capitalist and hyper-competitive uh,
It is.
economy that has been created, and
It,
it's not about making it about gender. That's just the reality. And
that, that,
I
that,
think
that,
to add to what Peter was saying, the other element that I think is important is that we are, aside from not dealing with the environmental issues or the governance issues, we're also living in a post-truth world because of the information environment that we live in. So we can't even agree on what is true. We can't even, discuss and debate things that are ought to be accepted fact. Unless you have that ground to stand on, how do you take a step?
Well, I like putting the gender argument aside and focusing more directly on caring versus simply knowing, and recognizing this is not, no gender should own that any more than any other gender. Go ahead, Jeff.
All right, and on the gender issue, I'll mention Gwen Shotwell, the head of SpaceX. Anyway, so Elon Musk has said in a recent interview that he expects the economy in 10 years will be about 10 times what it currently is, and that will bring abundance to everybody, assuming that we can avoid, going through World War III. I think that it's interesting. We're talking about the K-shaped economy. Well, certainly when the robots come out and people can afford robots, it'll be the wealthy people who can afford them first. So they will have that advantage. So that means, I could have a robot here that takes over all the drudgery tax, assuming that I was in the upper echelons of that group. I am not at the moment, but if I had a robot here, I could have all the housework, and I could have a garden planted in the back, and it could harvest food and save me money on groceries and all of those sorts of things, and free me up to be more creative. I think, though, the issue is a large part of the population has no desire to be creative. I think if you look at the mechanics and stuff, they're quite happy to be pulling wrenches. They're not interested in, writing books or music or whatever the case might be. So in their case, I think what's going to end up happening is there will, when they're replaced by the robots, they might putter around in their garage and tinker on stuff, or they might, just go and fall back on universal basic income, which I suspect will happen because of the extra productivity. But I don't know that they will become like super productive members of the economy. And there's a verse in the Bible that talks about the pre-flood times, and the people's thoughts were just continually towards evil. And I wonder if people don't have a purpose for living, if they just go to drugs and sex and rock and roll or whatever the case might be, and society degenerates, except for maybe a few elites who live in their ivory towers and the AIs that support everyone. Anyway, just a thought.
What do you mean, just a thought? Like I've thrown 15 different dimensions out there. One, drugs and rock and roll. I mean, I can hardly wait. On the other hand, I'd like to explore a little bit further the view of creativity. I don't think creativity necessarily falls into what we have historically been talking about, the arts. I think bringing science and arts together creates a whole new environment of creativity. The fact that he knows how to use tools doesn't necessarily he uses tools in the way he used to use them. He's mechanical. He may build something. I don't know. I don't know what that space is. I also, reflecting, Jeff, personally, when you talked about what life might be like for you if you were free, I'm free. I retired. I do what I want to do. I play. I took care of my income. I don't worry about the guaranteed income piece. But in a way, I'm an example. And this is an ego trip. But I have a garden. I have a wife I care for. I have a home. I cook. I get creative. I read Chinese cookbook. I do a lot of very different things. I'm learning every single day stuff that I never had time to learn before. So no, it isn't knowing. It's doing. I am doing things. I'm more caring. I spend more time with people who I actually care about and spend time telling them I care about that, which in the past it was almost a no-no because somehow it was in violation of the social norm that you weren't supposed to care, you were supposed to be productive and follow all the rules. I'm having the best time of my life.
I love that you're doing that. My concern is, and I see this in so many people around me and my family and friends and stuff, they would be quite content to play video games 24 hours a day if they could.
Then maybe that is their future. Maybe that is not necessarily unproductive. We judge it because it's not productive. Maybe that virtual world that they want to go live in is their choice.
Fair enough.
George, you've got your hand up. Go ahead, George.
If machines are taking over productivity a lot, and really smart people are doing really smart, innovative things, what do the rest of the people do? Do they play video games? Do they do whatever, play something? And how does education enter the mix? How do we get people educated by being educated to think rather than educated to learn what exists already in textbooks?
Well, you should be in charge because these are very legitimate questions for which we need answers. We need answers that I think, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. There is an individual with potential. There are individuals given birth to by mothers and fathers that have potential. We as a society seem to be increasingly neglectful of anything other than what is productive. Women looked to define their role when they were free and they wanted to become more productive. They wanted to compete on male terms about male things instead of recognizing that they may have something far richer to offer than what, and I'm back to gender without intent. There are other values in society, and maybe that's what we need to start waking up to, is what those values are. And asking questions like you asked, George, are critical. They're not judgmental. Those are good questions. And we need to have politicians, and maybe China did the right thing by asking their citizens, we need advice. We need to know how to govern you better if we can only know what you want and not just listen to the corporations that say what you ought to do is what makes us richer. What you need to do is what makes us as human beings richer. And what makes us richer as human beings? What makes your life more meaningful? What makes your life such that you want to live to 111, like me, or 120, or maybe 50?
We have woofers. Does anybody know what woofers are?
Yes, the sound boxes?
Not dogs. WWOOF.
Okay, what is it? What is it?
Opportunities on organic farms. And we've had two so far from mainland China and one from Taiwan. The ones from mainland China, I learned a lot. They said that they live basically sort of like we do. They have cars, they have houses, they have jobs and whatnot. But the big difference is if the government ever wants to remove them, or the government ever wants their business or their place, there's no option. They just take it.
Yeah.
And so that's why one of them left and came to Canada and became a Canadian citizen. The other one likes being there, but he's quite concerned.
Yeah, I think one needs to be careful not to romanticize the system. There are things that are positive about all systems.
I think one of the fundamental problems that's coming, and we're starting to see evidence of it, is that if you may recall back, and I think it was in the mid 90s, the idea of cocooning was a concept. There was a book called Cocooning, and I think we're seeing that now.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing it in particular among the younger generation, and more so among males than females, especially in China.
Yeah.
And the net result is that this is like self-inflicted sort of deterioration of the nuclear family. And if that's starting to deteriorate at the level of, young people not even wanting to communicate with their peers or their family, yet want to live in the home under the shelter because of economic conditions, we're moving into a world where, as we already see with social media, even when you go to a public place, they might go to a bar, 6 people at the bar at a table, none of them talking to each other, but all on their phone unit, probably texting each other at the table, but not speaking words. I mean, we're cocooning ourselves to a degree that I think it's going to be a very difficult thing to get out of.
But we've talked about the infrastructure of the knowledge economy being fragile. Even the family as an institution is struggling today in order to maintain its relevance when the individuals have so much freedom and so much independence and are wedded to this public social structure that the individual is becoming a public entity. The individual is losing their personal sovereignty and becoming agents of society. Go ahead, Richard.
To your point, Perry, and many of the other comments that were made, what I'm seeing, you talked about the silver lining. I mean, up until very recently, we as humans compared ourselves to other animals. So things like territorial imperative, and we would see ourselves in that context, but everything shifted now. And now we're comparing ourselves to this machine that's evolving minute by minute. And I really liked your comment, Perry, about walking on Salt Spring Island in the woods and observing, the moss and so on. So if there's a silver lining, maybe it's increasingly, and this is a an ongoing journey. We're going to have to look at ourselves, and Jeff, to your point, Jeff Kramer, whether you're an auto mechanic or you're a highly skilled engineer like yourself or whatever, we all are going to have to look at ourselves more closely. Who are we and what are we and what's our purpose? And there's some incredible value there because we've never had to do that before to this scale.
Well, I mean, Jeff, you know well what the book was all about is the unintended consequence of bringing people together to have discussions like this about who we are and why, without purpose, without intent to make profit, without intent to gain power, simply out of interest, to care about one another and hear, what are we individually and collectively? Who are we? What do we want to do? We don't have spaces for that. That doesn't go on in a classroom. That doesn't go on in a company. That doesn't go on during lunch hour. That doesn't go on Rotary. I don't know where one finds the last commons, the place that you can go to where you can have a safe discussion about whatever happens to come up without somebody wanting to politically manipulate you in terms of their interest. Go ahead, Bogdan.
Very, very interesting talk. I'm stressed even to comment. So first of all, the simple topic, AI is a tool. Once we get to used with it, it's going to have a positive impact. We just have to get used with it and not deify it. It's a tool that allows us to search in our own knowledge, in a cleaner way. And the second issue with the growth of complexity in governing, the loss of trust in institutions and so on, I keep repeating the concept of stigmergy, of a meta mind, a mind of the society. The foundation is culture, and we've artificialized the core concepts that hold culture together. I've mentioned last time Luke Kemp and Peter Turchin as two researchers in the field of social complexity and collapse and reset and so on. And I guess we are on for a reset. The level to which the collapse would happen depends on governance principles and so on. So the more the people have a word to say in the form of governance, the less deep the reset goes.
Okay, Peter or Bogdan. So let me reiterate what I think you're hearing, because I think you're reinforcing the relevance of personal sovereignty and the relevance of us as human beings having choices. The AI is only a threat to the extent we allow it to be a threat. We only become slaves to the extent which we allow ourselves to become slaves. That's a pretty positive statement, but there are a lot of human beings that don't really have that at birth. So where do you find in our society the agent that says to you as an individual, you have sovereignty? Is that our teacher? Is that our parent? Is that our government? I'm looking for the institution. I'm looking for a solution, Peter, where an institution that exists today, or maybe one that will exist tomorrow, that says to us as individuals, not collectively as sources of power, but that the power and the relevance of the human being is what we as individuals are and what we wish to express.
It's our life's mentors. When you raised this, the very first thought that came into my mind before you said it was teacher. So teacher to me is like a mentor. And so our life's mentors, whether it's parents, our young friends, our elderly, relatives, etc.
But you don't mean teacher as a member of a union.
No, I mean teacher as the person who you'd label a teacher.
Right, right. Bogdan.
Yeah, sorry, it's teacher from the earliest stages. So this is from parenting upwards, and the last remark is with the child that belongs to the community, to the village. That it takes a village to raise a child.
Okay, so if we have come close today to finding an institution that exists, it's parenting. It's that individual who feels an emotional, an intellectual, and a productive relationship with that newborn to say, I am going to help you grow life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But families, that structure needs to be reinforced.
Yes.
But that structure is being threatened too, as
That's
people
so
want to run away and
touching.
become independent and become their own and abandon their child and abandon that, or they don't have children at all, which is the other thing going on a world scale, is people not wanting to have children any longer and take on that role of being a teacher because it erodes their productivity and their material gains.
Yeah. Hence the reset that Luke and Kemp and Turchin are mentioning, that can go all the way down to the community, where the parents are educated by the community. In this way, they raise the right culture and the right structure in their kids.
Yeah.
And then you grow upwards to develop something that's stable as a society in its own context. So this is a serious reset.
Well, we've found a silver lining. It's called teaching at a parenting level, not necessarily through unions or institutions or education as we have known it, but going back to the essence of what makes for a good parent makes for a good society.
Let's use a broader word than just parenting, because the children should be part of the feedback there. So I'd say it's mentoring.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
it's learning through mentoring, and
It's
parenting
interesting.
is the mentoring, of course. It's
It's
just
interesting. I was
kind of
interviewed.
unique thing, and you think of parenting normally as parenting a baby or a very young child. But I mean, I've got 5 children, all adults, and I'm still mentoring children.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I'll personally reflect on a couple of things. I was interviewed a while back, and one of the most intriguing questions of me was about my role as a grandparent and the joy of doing something quite different than parenting, which is grandparenting, where I have more time and where my emotional connection is almost greater and less instrumental. The other is seeing families transform as children get older and get into their 50s and attend to their 80-year-old parents in a very different way than they did when they were 30 and I was 50, or I was 30 and they were 10. The relationship of child to family changes over a lifetime as well. And it's fascinating. I'm witnessing a 50-year-old male now attending to his 80-year-old parent in a very different way, much more open, much more adult to adult or child to child. It is so honest as opposed to being instrumental around you want me to do this or you want me to do that. If society would appreciate the lifelong relationship between a parent and a child, it isn't over. It's never over, and it should never
Never
be.
over. That's why I was saying I'm still parenting, still,
Yeah,
mentoring.
yeah,
And I would say one of the most wonderful things in life, at least certainly for me, one of the most absolutely wonderful things is to learn from your children,
sure.
and especially when they're young, because that's
Well,
when it's why,
I
why.
think okay, I'm going to wrap this up on a sense of humor, which I think we should often do. This has been serious, it's been philosophical, it's been insightful. We've been sharing with one another. I even used a four-letter word, which I'll delete when I record this. Maybe we should be sending armies of children to Washington. Maybe we should have more kids on the Parliament grounds. And I don't mean Greta Thunberg. She should be at the Strait of Hormuz this week. But maybe we need to
Bobby
listen to
Jimby.
kids. Maybe we need to listen, not necessarily here, but to let them know we're listening.
We needed Bobby Jimby. Remember
Okay,
him in 1967?
because that's
Canada, da da da.
yeah. I
And it
thought
was
that
always other young kids, well, almost like the Pied Piper. And in terms of the street performances that happened at
Well, I
that
was
time.
looking for sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but I guess we could end up on that one. So,
Harry.
yes, Tom.
Yeah, yeah. Um, just building on what Peter was talking about cocooning. You know, I've worked in TV my whole career, and really, I look out sometimes at society and I say, how are these people spending their time? How are they staying sane in these little boxes, which I now live in one? But, you know, if you didn't have television out there, would our society be any better or worse? I think that television has in many ways subdued our more difficult attitudes and feelings to a point where our society does manage to keep going. But if you took away television or media like it, you would suddenly be faced with a situation where the whole environment has people out in the streets, and the people are doing interactive things other than just sitting on their bums and watching TV.
Yeah,
So
they're
I think
protesting.
this cocooning thing has a really dangerous aspect to it.
Well, they're out in the streets protesting, but at the wrap up, this has been an extraordinary discussion. I want to thank the panel. I want to thank all of the participants that have joined us today. Um, I never have an idea of where we may end up, but today was insightful. I think there was something constructive, particularly around an understanding of the significance of the changes that are not just philosophical but are real. But maybe the silent majority is a lot smarter than we think they are. Maybe those of us that are doing all of the thinking and all of the worrying and need to step back for a moment and realize that maybe there are many people in society that are not as troubled, but are living simple lives with their children, with as parents, doing the very best they can, and finding that the fundamental answers that they're finding are pretty basic and are around good parenting, good grandparenting, uh, and learning together.